Welcome to You Not Crazy Conversations of Hope. We're here on episode 3 today. Listen, we are talking about The Wounded Child Speaks. We're going to be talking about understanding the impact of childhood experiences on our relationships and how we can build stronger connections. So let's hop into it. So listen, there's been a lot of research and connection with how childhood experiences can show up in our adulthood. Research has shown that there is a study called ACEs. It is known as Adverse Childhood Experiences. So it was a survey done with over 17,000 adults that discussed what happened in their childhood experience. And what happens is that these experiences refer to those stressful or those traumatic events that occur during childhood, such as abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, or exposure to violence. And it talks more about the negative impacts that these particular experiences can have on a person's physical and mental health throughout their lifetime. So today we're going to talk about how those experiences impacts relationships. So from the survey, I want to identify the different types of adverse experiences that an individual can experience during childhood, such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, household substance abuse, meaning somebody in your household was misusing substances, household mental illnesses, parental separation or divorce, domestic violence, and even having an incarcerated household member. So with that being said, there has been a correlation between those particular traumatic experiences in childhood and how they affect us as adults. So, what are some types of issues that come up as a result of these experiences? Well, one of the biggest things I've come to find with supporting my clients is difficulty trusting others. Okay, so if I grew up in a household where I may have had a parent who misused substance use, they may have been a little bit unpredictable, right? And so as a child, if they're constantly telling me, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and they're not doing it, that is going to build distrust within the child. And that distrust doesn't just automatically go away, not without processing and maybe therapy, but a lot of times that shows up in relationships, right? And that can look like an individual constantly scanning for a threat or fear, right? There's a distrust that ultimately develops within them. Other challenges that develop as a result of some of these adverse experiences is communication challenges. Yes. A lot of times when a child experiences trauma, they may not learn healthy communication skills. And does that disappear? No. That shows up in relationships as adults, right? So you ever had a situation where you're talking to your partner and then all of a sudden they are talking and it's like, wait, am I still talking to the same person here? It's almost like something has switched and they're now triggered to this maybe younger version of themselves, right? So in addition, one of the other things that I find that when it comes to our childhood trauma, and that again is not addressed, those experiences can correlate to more of emotional regulation issues. So a lot of times what I find is that those childhood experiences has not taught that child how to emotionally regulate. So a lot of times they deal with a lot of emotional dysregulation, and that may show up as in intense emotions such as anger, anxiety, or depression when there is a strained relationship going on, meaning when there's distress, when there's a conflict going on in a relationship, typically that individual may struggle with regulating their emotions at the time. What I also find that when we're not addressing the things from childhood, It may show up as repetition of patterns. It may show up in self-esteem issues. It may show up in boundary issues. What do I mean by boundary issues? Well, a lot of times people who have experienced violations growing up may suffer with boundaries issues, right? So if someone has dealt with boundary violations or intrusions during their childhood, they may struggle with setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, right? So for example, if I have an individual who may have dealt with sexual abuse, right? A lot of times they may struggle with telling people no, because for them, sexual abuse may have developed that they have to appease people, right? And so a lot of times they may struggle with maintaining, asserting their needs, or learning how to tell people about their personal space, because they also may have not developed the skills to have boundaries. And I also find that due to childhood experiences that are not addressed and that they show up in those relationships, we deal with the difficulty overall in just forming and maintaining relationships. So ultimately, what happens in these childhood experiences is that the individual is not developing those healthy coping mechanisms, those skill sets that they need to form and maintain healthy relationships. So with that being said, we know that our childhood experiences can have effects on us, right? And so ultimately, I want to talk about how we as adults can recognize the patterns and the triggers so that we can begin to start working towards healing our connections with our partners and even in friendships. But particularly, I want to hone in on partnerships. All right, so typically there are two emotional responses that come up when you have dealt with childhood adverse experiences. Either you're dealing with an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment. What do I mean by that? Well, anxious attachment individuals who experience trauma develop hypervigilancy, right? So they're constantly scanning their environment for potential threats. They're more experiencing heightened anxiety. They may deal with more emotional reactions because they haven't been taught how to soothe themselves enough to deal with maybe their high emotions or conflict. So you may have an individual who's more anxiously attached who may typically be more emotion reactive, may get angry, may threaten to leave the relationship because they haven't learned the necessary skills to self-soothe. Then on the other end, we have the avoidant attachment. So a lot of times in our childhood experiences, if we have caregivers who are not consistent, this may make more individuals prone to the avoidant attachment. In this case, they may have learned when emotions get high, whether that's because a caregiver would yell or fight, or they were witnessing fighting as a result of what was going on in the dynamics at the time. They may be more prone to withdrawing when conflict or high emotions come up at that time. Right? And so you may see this individual maybe having a difficulty expressing their emotions or even carrying on a conversation because their go-to is to just to avoid the situation until they are able to self-soothe and regulate. So in both particular emotional responses, the core attachment is triggered when they're not able to emotionally regulate. All right. So what then can we do next? Now that we have this knowledge, well, I want to give you some more strategies how to maintain these healthy connections. All right. So although trauma and research has really talked about that trauma can affect relationships, there are things that you can do to begin to cultivate healthy relationships, all right? So if you find yourself in any of those categories that I mentioned before, I want to give you these strategies. Well, first and foremost, therapy, okay? So I know your friends, they can give you information. But when it comes to relationships, I find that friends are more like, nah, girl, listen, he did this, he did that. We ain't got time for that extra understanding. Just leave, or just set this boundary, or do this and do that. And sometimes they are not able to understand the details to the fullness from a professional lens. So I'm going to really challenge you to consider therapy, because in therapy, we do what we call self-awareness. We build a skill set so that you are aware of yourself first before we really being in tune to what your partner may or may not be doing. So let's start with that one first, right? And if therapy is not an option for you, because listen, we understand that we live in a time that sometimes the access to therapy is not there, and we may want to get started now. So I would say educate yourself. There are numerous books that talks about the correlation between trauma and relationships. But as I mentioned before in that first step, you need to be in tune more with yourself first. I find a lot of times with my couples is that it's easier to focus in on what the other person is doing wrong, right? That's not what this is about. If I want to heal from the trauma that is showing up in my relationships, I want to be in tune with myself first. I want to figure out how my trauma is showing up in my relationship before I'm figuring out how my partner's trauma is showing up in the relationship. So educate yourself, but also practice self-compassion. Listen, what happened to us in childhood was not our fault, right? And it can seem unfair, especially when we are reacting and responding from those experiences and we don't know how to stop. However, it is very important that we provide ourselves with self-compassion, because now, even though it wasn't our fault, it is our responsibility to take the step. And sometimes taking the step can be absolutely scary when you don't even know in what way to move or to step. Should I go left? Should I go right? I don't know what to do. Well, be patient with yourself. Give yourself compassion that this is years and years of unlearning habits, traits, behavior, certain type of thinking. And it takes time to unlearn those things to relearn new skill sets. All right. And so with that being said, I also want to encourage you to consider communication skills. So again, you can do that in therapy, but if therapy is not an option for you, communication skills, finding books, finding podcasts such as this, right, that will teach you how to develop communication skills, so that even if that communication skill is simply, I don't know why I'm reacting the way I'm reacting. Charge it to my head, not my heart. I'm still learning myself. But I need you to be patient with me because I'm still trying to figure it out. Let's start with that. That will at least show your partner that, okay, I may not understand what you're pointing out to me, but at least I'm taking the steps, and I want to at least start by communicating that I acknowledge what you're sharing with me. I'm acknowledging the feedback that they may be giving or that my family may be giving about what they notice in me that comes out when I'm overwhelmed, right? So I want to first start with that communication step with my partners in my relationships. Hey, I may be not sure why I'm reacting the way I am, but be patient with me. So that is a skill that we all can put into practice, right? So taking that step and setting boundaries. Boundaries can just simply look like, hey, you know what? When you're yelling, I notice that it's evoking some type of emotion in me. So I'm just going to ask you not to yell as I'm trying to figure out why these extra emotions are invoking in me, because I want us to create a healthy dynamic in a relationship where we're not yelling at each other. That is a boundary. Boundaries about what you can control within yourself, not other people, right? And so ultimately, that is the step I'm going to encourage you to do. All right. And so ultimately, when it comes to our trauma, right? So we have some strategies, some skills that we can tap in. We can go to therapy. We can consider some self-help books. But one of the biggest thing that I also want to challenge you to do is to cultivate your support network, right? Because a lot of times our vision is just tunnel vision. We can only see straight ahead. We cannot see beyond that. So sometimes we need another perspective to help us see the things that we're not seeing as a result of things that may come up from our childhood experiences. So I will challenge you to cultivate a support network where you can be vulnerable to say, hey, this is what happened in the conflict that I had in my relationship, and I don't understand it. It's those some things that you're seeing in me that I'm doing, so I can kind of understand. That is the importance of a network of people that you call your support system. All right. So ultimately, cultivating that support system also cultivates one of the biggest components of healing through childhood traumas is safety. I recognize that when survivors feel safe, they are better able to manage their overwhelming emotions, such as anxiety, anger, or sadness, and communicate their needs and boundaries effectively. Safety looks like having a supportive environment where I feel accepted, I feel secure without judgment, and I'm receiving validation. So we really want to enhance safety in our relationships to even begin the process of healing our childhood wounds so that they're no longer affecting how we're responding in our relationships. So again, we know that these adverse childhood experiences can significantly impact our contributions in our relationships, but there are some small steps that we can take to begin to redefine the healthiness of our connections or maintaining and fostering healthy connections. So I want to leave you with a quote, okay? Building healthier relationships after experiencing past traumas requires courage, compassion, and commitment. It's about creating a safe space where wounds can heal, trust can grow, and love can flourish despite the scars of our past. Although we experience these things, it may not be our fault, but healing's our responsibility, but our scars do not have to define us. All right. So here's a question I want to leave with you to reflect on. How can I use my understanding of past trauma to cultivate empathy, communication, and trust in my current relationships? And what steps can I take to create a safe and supportive environment where healing and growth are nurtured and where love and connection can thrive despite the challenges of the past? I really want you to think of that, right? Because relationships, listen, they take work, right? And even if you made mistakes in the relationship, there is hope that you can make changes. Each day is a new day to start over. It's a clean slate. All right. So give yourself that clean slate. So thank you for taking the time to tune in and join us here at You Not Crazy Conversations of Hope. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who may need that message. And don't forget, you're not crazy. I really hope that you took something away from today's episode, and I really hope that today's discussion empowers you with the knowledge and insight to show up differently in your relationships, right? So again, we know that challenges happen as a result of those childhood experiences. They just follow us into adulthood, but there is hope, there is strategies, there is support that you can overcome those adverse experiences so that you can show up differently. So as you continue your journey, remember, you're not alone. Reach out for support, seek resources, and never underestimate your ability to be resilient. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who may need this information, who needs a reminder that they're not crazy. They just need a conversation of hope.